On the morning of my son's wedding, I woke up to a feeling of dread. As I rubbed my eyes and tried to get my bearings, I reached up to fix my hair. And that's when I felt it. The smoothness of my scalp completely bare. My heart skipped a beat. I jumped out of bed and ran to the mirror, gasping when I saw what had happened. My once thick, gray hair was gone, and I was left staring at a bald reflection of myself. I couldn't believe it. I thought back to the night before, the wedding preparations and all the excitement. But something had gone terribly wrong. I remembered going to bed with my hair intact, but this was something else. How could this happen, especially now? As I stood frozen in front of the mirror, I heard the faint sound of voices downstairs. The house felt too quiet, too still for such a monumental day. I stood there trying to process the reality of what I was seeing. And then I noticed something else, something chilling. On the dresser, my phone had a message notification. It was from my son's fiancée, Rebecca. I tapped the screen, my hands shaking. "Hope you're enjoying your beauty sleep, Mom. Can't wait to see you today." The words felt like a slap in the face. Beauty sleep? Was this some cruel joke? My mind raced. How could she be so calm? I didn't know whether to feel anger, sadness, or confusion. What was Rebecca's role in all of this? How did I go from being the mother of the groom to someone who was just a punchline in her world? As the minutes passed, I felt a growing sense of betrayal. But I wouldn't let this ruin the day. No, I had to keep my composure. It was my son's wedding. And no matter what had happened, I had to be there. But deep down I knew something was off. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. Something had changed. The woman I had welcomed into my family with open arms was now my biggest threat. I couldn't let her win. Not today. Not ever. The sound of wedding preparations filled the air, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart in my ears. I tried to shake off the dread gnawing at me, but as I slowly made my way down the stairs, I couldn't escape the reality that had unfolded in the quiet of the night. My son's wedding day had arrived, and instead of excitement, I felt a pit in my stomach. The house was decorated beautifully, with flowers everywhere, and I could see the guests beginning to gather outside. But nothing felt right. I walked into the living room, my eyes scanning the space, and there was Rebecca, my son's fiancée, greeting everyone with a perfect smile. Her hair was immaculate, her makeup flawless, but her eyes, they were cold. She noticed me, of course, but she didn't rush over to greet me like she used to. Instead, she just gave me a nod, a polite but distant gesture, as if everything was normal. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not here. Not now. I had raised Michael, and this was supposed to be one of the proudest days of my life. But my heart ached as I saw how far I had fallen in Rebecca's eyes. She hadn't just ignored me. She had stripped me of my dignity. I tried to push the thought away, telling myself it was just nerves about the wedding. But as the minutes ticked by, I couldn't deny that something was wrong. I wasn't just a guest at my son's wedding. I was a stranger in my own family. As I watched Rebecca laugh and chat with the guests, I realized how isolated I had become. Michael, my own son, was caught up in the whirlwind of his wedding day, and all I could do was watch from the sidelines. He smiled at me when he saw me, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. It was like he didn't see me anymore, not the way he used to. He was busy, happy, and completely unaware of the pain I was feeling. But it wasn't just him. Rebecca had been manipulating him for months, and now she was trying to take control of my place in this family. I walked into the kitchen, my hands trembling as I grabbed a glass of water. The coldness of the glass helped steady my nerves, but the weight in my chest only grew heavier. I had to confront this, I knew I did. But I had to be careful. There was more at stake than just my own hurt feelings. If I didn't handle this right, I might lose everything I had left. And I wasn't ready to let that happen. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the glass of water in my hand. It was almost like the coldness of the glass was the only thing that could bring any sense of reality back to me. My mind raced, replaying the events of the morning, the wedding preparations, the way Rebecca had looked at me, the way she had barely acknowledged my presence. It was clear she wanted nothing to do with me. And Michael, he didn't seem to notice, or maybe he just didn't care. I remembered the days when he would seek my advice, when he would come to me for comfort, for guidance. But now it felt like I was invisible to him. I had always been there for him for every milestone, every birthday, every setback. But today I was just an outsider, watching as the son I raised became part of something that didn't include me. I couldn't help but feel that I had been replaced. Not just by Rebecca but by a life that was moving on without me. The wedding wasn't about me anymore. It was about them, and I was just a guest in my own son's life. I took a deep breath, setting the glass down on the counter. I couldn't let this ruin everything. Michael deserved to be happy, but I deserved respect. And I wasn't about to let Rebecca take that from me. I walked back into the living room, forcing a smile as I made my way through the crowd. It felt like I was walking through a dream, disconnected from everything around me. People congratulated me on Michael's big day, but all I could think about was how different everything felt now. I stood by the window, looking out at the garden where Michael had once played as a child. It was hard to reconcile that image with the man he had become, the man who barely had time for me anymore. I glanced over at Rebecca, laughing with her friends. Her smile was wide and bright, but there was something cold in her eyes. I knew that look. I had seen it before on people who didn't care. And it was clear now that Rebecca didn't care about me. But what I didn't know was whether Michael had noticed. Whether he was still the same boy I had raised or if he had changed completely. I had to know. I had to understand what had happened to my son, and why he was allowing all of this to unfold right in front of him. The wedding ceremony had begun, and everything felt like it was happening in a blur. I stood at the back of the room trying to steady my nerves. The soft music played and I could hear the quiet murmur of guests, but it all felt so distant, like I was in a separate world from everyone else. I watched Michael as he stood at the altar, his smile wide and filled with happiness. His new wife, Rebecca, stood beside him, radiant in her wedding gown. They looked perfect together. And yet, all I could feel was a deep sense of emptiness. I had never felt so alone, even in a room full of people. As the ceremony continued, I found my eyes wandering toward the guests, each one smiling, talking, laughing. But none of them looked at me the way they used to. I was just a background figure now. I had been replaced. The more I watched them, the more it became clear that Rebecca had taken my place in my son's life. She was the one he turned to now, the one he shared his moments with. I could see it in the way he looked at her, the way he laughed at her jokes, the way he held her hand. It was as if I had never existed, as if all those years of love and care meant nothing anymore. I had raised him, nurtured him, but now I was nothing more than a spectator in his life. After the ceremony, I found myself standing by the window, watching the guests mingle outside. Michael and Rebecca were busy, of course, lost in their own little world. I felt the sting of jealousy, not because of her, but because of the space she had taken in my son's heart. He had changed and I didn't know if I could ever get him back. I had given him everything, every ounce of love and energy, and now it felt like it wasn't enough. My mind was spinning as I turned away from the window, trying to push away the feelings of abandonment. But deep down I knew I had to face the truth. I had to know what had happened to my son, and why he had allowed all of this to happen. Was I just a memory to him now? Or was there still a chance to fix things before it was too late? As the night went on, I could feel the tension growing in the air. The wedding reception had begun, but all I could think about was the conversation I needed to have with Michael. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The silence between us had stretched for so long, and it was clear that Rebecca had already made her mark in our family. I watched as she moved from one guest to the next, her laughter filling the room, but there was no warmth in her smile when she looked at me. It was as if I was invisible to her, and to Michael. The thought of confronting her made my stomach churn, but it was something I couldn't avoid. I had raised Michael. I had loved him with everything I had, and now he barely acknowledged me. It was like I wasn't even a part of his life anymore. The weight of it hit me harder as I watched him stand beside Rebecca, so completely absorbed in her, as if I had never been the one to wipe his tears, to comfort him when he was scared. I had been his mother, his protector, and now I was just forgotten. After what felt like an eternity, I finally found myself standing alone in a quiet corner of the room. I needed to gather my thoughts before I faced him. I had to understand why things had changed so drastically. Was it really just Rebecca's influence, or had Michael made his own choice? I couldn't decide which hurt more. I thought back to all the times I had been there for him, supporting him through everything, from his first heartbreak to the struggles he faced in his career. And now, I was a stranger in my own son's life. When I spotted Michael, he was laughing with one of his old friends, his arm around Rebecca. She smiled up at him, her eyes sparkling with affection. But as I looked closer, I saw something else. In Michael's eyes, something I hadn't seen before. There was a flicker of guilt, of hesitation, but it quickly disappeared when he turned his attention back to Rebecca. Was he aware of what was happening? Did he feel the distance between us two? I wasn't sure. But one thing was clear. I had to find out the truth. I couldn't keep living in this uncertainty, this feeling of being pushed aside. I had to know what was going on, and I had to confront it head-on. The night wasn't over, and neither was my fight for the son I had raised. The evening carried on, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. I tried to focus on the celebration, the clinking of glasses, the laughter that filled the air, but it all felt like a distant hum, a background noise to the turmoil within me. I had spent years raising Michael, guiding him, loving him, and now he was slipping away from me. He was no longer the young boy who needed his mother's comforting words. No, now he was a man with a woman by his side, a woman who had already made her mark on his heart. I needed answers, and I needed them now. The moment felt like it had been building up for months, this quiet storm brewing between us, with Rebecca at the center of it all. I watched her as she mingled with the guests, and I could feel the tension in the air. She was so confident, so sure of her place in Michael's life. But I wasn't ready to give up mine just yet. I walked up to Michael, who was standing near the bar, chatting with some of his old friends. He looked at me when I approached, but it was different this time. There was no warmth in his eyes, no spark of recognition, just a cold politeness that stung more than anything. "Hey Mom," he said, his voice distant. "How's everything going?" I forced a smile, trying to keep my emotions in check. "It's going fine, Michael," I replied, my voice steady. But inside my heart was breaking. I took a deep breath, trying to find the courage to ask the questions that had been weighing on me for so long. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice quieter this time. He raised an eyebrow but nodded, excusing himself from his friends. We walked away from the crowd into a quieter part of the room. The music faded behind us, and for the first time that night, I felt like I could breathe. "What's going on, Michael?" I asked, my voice breaking slightly. "What's happened to us?" He looked at me, and for a moment I saw something flicker in his eyes, something familiar, something that made my heart hope for just a second. But it was gone almost as quickly as it had appeared. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice nonchalant, but I could see the tension in his posture. "You've changed," I said, taking a step closer. "You've become someone I don't recognize. You're not the son I raised. And Rebecca, she's pulling you away from me." Michael shifted uncomfortably, and for a split second I saw guilt in his eyes. But he quickly masked it, his expression hardening. "Mom, I'm just trying to move forward. Rebecca and I are starting our own life, and that doesn't mean I don't care about you." His words cut through me like a knife. I wanted to scream, to tell him everything I had been holding inside for months, but I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I stood there, feeling the weight of everything we had lost. He was slipping away from me, and I couldn't stop it. The conversation between Michael and I lingered in the air, thick with unresolved tension. His words echoed in my mind. "I'm just trying to move forward, star." But what did that really mean? As he turned away, my chest tightened, and I realized I could no longer stay silent. I had to say something, anything to make him see the truth. "Michael," I called softly, my voice barely audible over the hum of the music from the reception. He paused but didn't turn around. "I didn't raise you to just forget where you came from. To forget the people who loved you." His shoulders tensed, and I saw his jaw tighten. He finally faced me, but there was something in his eyes I hadn't expected. Anger, frustration, or maybe a mixture of both. "Mom, it's not like that," he said, his voice shaking slightly, but his tone was defensive. "You don't get it. I'm not forgetting you. I'm just trying to have my own life. A life with Rebecca. A life that's different from the one I had with you." The words stung, each one like a slap across my face. My whole life had been about putting him first, and now he was telling me that what we had wasn't enough. That I wasn't enough. I felt the tears welling up, but I refused to let them fall. I had to be strong for both of us. Is that it then? You've moved on, and now I'm just in the way? I asked, trying to keep the tremor from my voice. His expression softened for a moment, but then he shook his head. It's not like that, Mom, he repeated, his voice quieter now. It's just, things change, star. People change. I swallowed hard. And you don't think that maybe I've changed too? Or maybe I'm just trying to hold on to what little I have left of you? His eyes flickered with something. Guilt, regret, I wasn't sure. But before I could say anything more, Rebecca walked over to us, her smile as bright as ever, but it didn't reach her eyes. She placed a hand on Michael's shoulder, and I could feel the shift in the air. Everything okay here? She asked, her voice sweet, but there was something in the way she looked at me. It wasn't concern. It was something else, something cold. Michael smiled at her, the warmth in his eyes returning. Yeah, Mom and I were just talking, he said. But there was a subtle edge to his words now. Rebecca's eyes flicked to me, then back to him, as if making sure everything was in order. I couldn't stand it anymore. The silence. The distance. The lies. I knew I couldn't go on pretending everything was fine. You're not the only one whose life has changed, Michael, I said, my voice steady despite the pain clawing at my chest. But if you think I'm going to just stand by and watch you throw everything away, you're wrong. I'll fight for you for what we had. The moment hung between us, a heavy silence settling over us like a blanket. Michael looked at me, then at Rebecca, who was still standing there a little too close. I could feel the distance growing, but it was too late to turn back now. I had said my piece. Now I had to wait and see if my son still remembered the mother who had always fought for him. The next morning everything felt different. The wedding was over, but the aftermath lingered like a storm cloud, heavy and suffocating. I had gone to bed exhausted from the day's events, but sleep hadn't come easily. My mind kept replaying the conversation with Michael, the look in his eyes when I spoke about how things had changed between us. I couldn't help but wonder if he realized how much he had drifted away, or if he was just too caught up in his new life with Rebecca to see it. I stood by the window, staring out at the garden that had once been filled with laughter and warmth. Now it felt empty, just like me. I had spent years nurturing and caring for Michael, pouring everything I had into him. But now it was like I had become an afterthought in his life, a shadow in the background while Rebecca took center stage. As I stood there lost in my thoughts, I heard a soft knock on the door. I turned surprised. I hadn't expected anyone. It was Michael, standing at the threshold, his face tired but soft. Mom, he said quietly, his voice lacking the usual firmness. Can we talk? My heart skipped a beat, and I nodded, motioning for him to come in. He stepped inside, and the tension that had been building between us seemed to dissipate, just for a moment. He sat down in the chair across from me, his eyes avoiding mine at first, but then he looked up, his gaze filled with something I hadn't seen in a long time: regret. I've been thinking a lot about what you said last night, he began, his voice heavy with the weight of unspoken words. And I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you feel like you're not important to me. I've just been so wrapped up in everything, in Rebecca and the wedding, that I didn't stop to think about how you were feeling. My chest tightened, and I struggled to hold back the tears that were threatening to spill. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to me. Michael, I've always been here for you, I said softly, my voice breaking. I've always tried to support you no matter what. And now it feels like you've forgotten about me. You've changed and I don't know how to fix it. He reached out, taking my hand gently in his. I haven't forgotten you, Mom, he said, his voice sincere. I didn't know how to balance everything. I didn't realize how much I was pushing you away. I looked into his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the son I had raised, the son who still cared. Maybe there was hope after all. Maybe we could find our way back to each other, even if it took time. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to believe that things could be different. As the days passed after our conversation, I could feel the shift in the air. Michael had made an effort to reconnect, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was drifting in the current, helpless to do anything. The wedding had come and gone, but the bond between us, though fragile, was beginning to mend. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. We talked more, slowly rebuilding the connection we had lost over the past few years. I could see how much effort Michael was putting in, and I knew this wasn't just about him wanting peace. He truly wanted to repair what had been broken. Rebecca, too, seemed to notice the change. She no longer avoided me in the same way, though I could still sense a wall between us. But I was willing to be patient. After all, this was my family. Michael had always been my world, and despite everything that had happened, I couldn't stop loving him. One afternoon, as we sat in the living room, Michael turned to me with a small, hesitant smile. "I was thinking," he began, "maybe we could all sit down together, have a family dinner, just the three of us. I know it's been a while, but it feels right. Would you be okay with that?" The offer was small, but to me it was everything. It was the first time in a long time I had heard him say those words without hesitation, without the shadow of Rebecca hanging over them. I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "I would like that, Michael. I really would." A few days later, we gathered around the table, me, Michael, and Rebecca. It wasn't the same as it used to be, but it was a step forward. We ate, we talked, and for a brief moment it felt like we were all in the same place again. I looked at Michael, the man I had raised, and I saw the son I had always known, not the stranger who had left me behind. As I sat there, surrounded by the people I loved, I realized that family wasn't just about the perfect moments. It was about the willingness to fight for one another, to show up even when it felt hard, to admit when things weren't right, and to try again. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again.